In the heart of Texas, where life often feels simple but struggles run deep, two strangers crossed paths by chance. Jake Collins, a weary mechanic haunted by the loss of his sister, had long buried his heart beneath grease-stained hands and the rhythm of broken engines. Emily Hayes, a young woman bound to a failing wheelchair and a lifetime of quiet battles, carried scars no one could see, scars of being overlooked, dismissed, and left to fend for herself. When their worlds collided in a small workshop outside Dallas, neither expected the bond that would grow. What began as a simple repair of rusted wheels became something far greater, a story of healing, resilience, and two broken souls learning that sometimes, the right person can fix more than what's broken on the outside. They can restore hope within. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon in Ohio, USA. John Miller, a 36-year-old factory worker, decided to leave work early. His boss had given him the rest of the day off because the machines were down. John thought it would be a perfect surprise for his wife, Emily, and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. But as he pulled into the driveway, something inside him felt uneasy. The house was too quiet, no TV, no laughter, no sound of Lily playing with her dolls. John unlocked the door and stepped in. What he saw in the living room froze him. Emily, his wife of 10 years, was gripping Lily by the arm, shaking her violently. Lily's tear-streaked face showed pure fear. "Why can't you do anything right?" Emily screamed, raising her hand as if to strike again. John's heart dropped. He had never seen Emily this way. In that moment, anger, shock, and heartbreak flooded his chest. "Emily," he shouted, rushing forward. He grabbed Lily away and held her tightly, shielding her small body. "What the hell are you doing?" Emily's face turned pale. She hadn't expected him home. "John, I didn't mean." She wasn't listening, but John couldn't listen. His daughter's sobs tore him apart. He looked down at Lily, who clung to him, trembling. "Daddy, please don't let Mommy hurt me again," she whispered. Those words shattered him. Within hours, John made the hardest decision of his life. He called the police and child services. Emily was taken away, screaming and crying, while Lily hid her face in John's chest. The home that once felt warm and safe was now filled with broken trust. Weeks passed. John fought through endless court hearings, therapy sessions for Lily, and the crushing weight of betrayal. Neighbors whispered, family members judged, but John stayed strong for his daughter. One night, as he tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with tired eyes. "Daddy, are you going to leave me too?" she asked softly. John hugged her tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Never, sweetheart. I'll protect you forever." That night, John promised himself he would raise Lily with all the love in his heart, making sure she would never again feel the pain she endured that day. Because sometimes, love isn't about saving a marriage, it's about saving your child. Jake Collins wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, stretching his back as the Texas evening sun began to sink behind the line of old oak trees. His small workshop, tucked just off a quiet road outside Dallas, wasn't fancy. The tin roof leaked when it rained, and the concrete floor was cracked in places, but it was his world. Cars and motorcycles lined the lot, some waiting for repairs, others stripped for parts. Jake didn't care about appearances. What mattered to him was the work. Fixing broken things gave him purpose, a reason to keep moving after the hard years that had carved deep lines into his face. He had just finished tightening the bolts on a customer's truck when he heard the faint squeak of wheels scraping against the concrete. He turned his head and saw her, a young woman slowly maneuvering herself into his shop on a battered old wheelchair. The sound alone told him something was wrong with the chair. The front wheel wobbled, the right brake was clearly shot, and the cushions looked worn down to the fabric's bones. She was pushing hard with her arms, clearly exhausted from the effort, but her face carried a polite smile despite the struggle. Jake set down his tools and approached, brushing the dust off his hands. The woman looked up at him, her brown eyes cautious, as though she had already braced herself for rejection. "Sorry to bother you," she said softly, her voice tinged with embarrassment. I don't know if you even do this kind of thing, but my chair's falling apart. I can't afford a new one." Her words were clipped, defensive, as if she had repeated that excuse 100 times before, to strangers who didn't care enough to listen. Jake crouched down beside her, his eyes scanning the damage with the same attention he gave an engine. The wheels had uneven bearings, one of the footrests was bent, and the rubber on the tires was nearly smooth. He didn't hesitate. "Don't worry, I'll fix it up like brand new," he said with quiet certainty. The woman blinked, as if she hadn't expected kindness. Most people avoided eye contact with her, or worse, pitied her. But Jake's tone carried no pity, just the steady assurance of someone who meant what he said. The woman introduced herself as Emily Hayes. She was 29, originally from a neighboring town, and life hadn't been easy for her. She spoke carefully, only giving details when he asked, clearly protective of her story. Jake didn't push. He had met enough people in life to know that trust was earned, not demanded. Instead, he gently rolled the chair forward, testing its balance, and asked her to leave it with him for a couple of days. Emily hesitated, her hands gripping the worn armrests, but eventually nodded. "I guess I don't have much choice," she murmured, though there was the faintest trace of relief in her voice. As she maneuvered into the passenger seat of a neighbor's car that had driven her over, Jake watched her with a strange mix of emotions. Something about her movements, her quiet resilience, reminded him painfully of his late sister, Claire. Years ago, Claire had relied on a wheelchair too, after a car accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. Jake had spent countless hours keeping her chair running smoothly, because he knew how much independence it gave her. Losing Claire had been one of the hardest blows of his life, and seeing Emily now stirred something protective deep inside him. Fixing her chair wasn't just another job, it was personal. That evening, after locking up the workshop, Jake wheeled the chair into the back corner where the best light hit his workbench. He ran his hands over the frame, inspecting every crack and loose joint. His eyes softened as he thought of how many miles Emily must have traveled in this chair, how many battles she must have fought just to get through each day. Most people never thought about what it meant to rely on something as simple as a chair. But to someone like Emily, or like Claire once was, it wasn't just a machine. It was freedom. It was dignity. It was the difference between being part of the world and being left behind by it. Jake began disassembling the wheels, his fingers moving with practiced precision. The bearings were rusted, almost crumbling in places. He knew he could clean them up, but replacing them would be better. He made a mental list of the parts he'd need, already planning a trip to the salvage yard in the morning. He didn't charge Emily anything up front. In fact, he doubted she could pay much at all. But that didn't matter to him. This wasn't about money, it was about giving someone back a piece of their life. As the night grew colder, Jake lost himself in the rhythm of work. The shop was quiet except for the soft hum of a radio and the clinking of his tools. For a brief moment, he could almost imagine Claire sitting nearby, teasing him like she used to, telling him he was too stubborn for his own good. The thought both warmed and hurt him. He wiped his eyes quickly, shaking the memory away. This wasn't about the past. This was about Emily, and making sure she never had to feel stranded the way Claire sometimes had. The next morning, Jake loaded the broken parts into his truck and drove into town. The salvage yard was a maze of rusted frames, discarded appliances, and forgotten machines. But Jake had a gift. He could see potential where others saw trash. After an hour of searching, he found a pair of sturdy wheels from an old hospital chair, a set of brake pads that just needed polishing, and even some thick padding he could reshape into armrests. He paid barely $20 for the lot, loaded it into his truck, and headed back to his shop with a rare sense of satisfaction. Over the following days, Jake poured his energy into the repair. He sanded down the frame until it gleamed, realigned the axles, and fitted the salvaged wheels with new bearings he bought out of pocket. He replaced the brakes, tightened every bolt, and carefully stitched new covers over the armrest. When he finished, the chair didn't just look better, it looked stronger, more reliable, ready to carry its owner for years to come. He even polished the metal until it caught the sunlight, because he wanted Emily to feel proud of it, not ashamed. When Emily returned, her eyes widened at the sight. She ran her fingers over the smooth armrests, tested the wheels with cautious pushes, and then looked up at Jake with disbelief. It's perfect," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jake shrugged, embarrassed by her gratitude. "It's just a chair," he said, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. Emily's tears proved that. She sat a little straighter, her hands resting easily on the wheels, and for the first time since they'd met, Jake saw her smile without hesitation. In that smile, Jake felt something shift. This wasn't the end of a job, it was the beginning of something else. He didn't know what, not yet. But as Emily thanked him again and rolled herself toward the door, Jake felt the same protective warmth that had guided his hands all week. He had fixed her chair, yes, but maybe, just maybe, he had repaired something in himself too. Emily left the shop that day with her refurbished chair gliding smoothly beneath her. The neighbor who had dropped her off before was waiting in the car, but this time, she didn't struggle to push herself toward it. Each turn of the wheels felt lighter, steadier. For the first time in years, she didn't have to second-guess whether the brakes would fail or the frame would give out. She glanced back once at Jake, who stood in the doorway wiping his hands on a rag. She gave him a small wave, and he returned it with a nod. Neither of them spoke, but something unspoken lingered between them. Over the next week, Emily found herself thinking about Jake more than she expected. Most people in her life treated her chair as a reminder of limitations, something fragile that should be pitied. But Jake hadn't seen her like that. He had looked at the chair like a machine, something that deserved to be maintained, not mourned. It shifted something in her. She wanted to thank him again, but she didn't know how. Her pride had always made her cautious. She didn't want to appear needy. Still, each time she rolled past the mirror in her small apartment, she caught sight of herself sitting taller, her chair gleaming, and she whispered, "Thank you, Jake," as if he could somehow hear. Jake, meanwhile, returned to his usual grind of repairing trucks and motorcycles. But Emily's visit lingered in his mind. He caught himself checking the chair in the corner where he'd worked on hers, remembering the quiet determination in her eyes. At night, when the shop lights dimmed and he sat alone with a cold beer, memories of Claire blended with the image of Emily's grateful smile. He had told himself long ago that he wouldn't get close to people again, not after losing his sister. But Emily wasn't asking him for closeness. She had simply reminded him that kindness mattered, even in the smallest of ways. A week later, as Jake was adjusting the timing belt on a Chevy, he heard the familiar squeak of wheels approaching. He looked up and saw Emily again, this time without hesitation. She rolled into the shop with a determined push, her hair tied back, and a paper bag resting on her lap. "I brought something," she said, almost shyly. Jake raised an eyebrow as she handed him the bag. Inside was a homemade apple pie, still warm. "I'm not much of a baker, but it's the least I could do," she said. Jake chuckled, touched more than he expected. "You didn't have to." Emily smiled faintly. "I know. That's why I did." They shared the pie at a small workbench, eating off mismatched plates Jake dug up from the break room. It wasn't perfect. The crust was uneven, and the filling bubbled over in spots, but it tasted like something made with care. Between bites, Emily talked more than she had the first time. She told him she worked part-time doing data entry from home, that she lived alone since her parents had passed, and that most days, she kept to herself. Jake listened, nodding, offering bits of his own story in return. He told her about the workshop, about growing up fixing cars with his father, and about the sister he had lost, though he didn't share every detail yet. As the evening stretched on, the conversation grew easier, like they had known each other longer than a week. Emily laughed once, a small, genuine sound that surprised even her. Jake found himself smiling at the sound. It had been years since laughter had filled the dusty corners of his shop. When she finally left, rolling smoothly down the path, Jake felt the silence that followed way differently than usual. It wasn't just loneliness anymore, it was a reminder of connection. Days turned into weeks, and Emily became a regular visitor. Sometimes she brought food, chili in a thermos, fresh cornbread, or leftovers she didn't want to waste. Other times she just came to sit, watching Jake work as the radio hummed in the background. She liked the smell of grease and metal, the way the shop felt alive with the hum of engines. Jake, in turn, found himself looking forward to her visits. He began keeping the shop tidier, clearing a small space where her chair could roll comfortably, even fixing up an old stool so she could use it as a makeshift table when she came by. One evening, as a thunderstorm rolled across Texas, Emily arrived drenched from the rain despite the umbrella she carried. Jake quickly ushered her inside, handing her a towel. "You shouldn't have come out in this weather," he scolded lightly, but Emily just laughed. "I was bored at home. Besides, I like the sound of rain." They sat together, listening as thunder rumbled overhead and rain battered the roof. For a while, neither spoke, both content in the quiet companionship. Then Emily said softly, "Most people don't really see me, you know? But you do. You treat me like I matter." Jake swallowed hard, the words striking deeper than he expected. "That's because you do," he replied simply. Over time, Jake learned more about Emily's struggles, the way some strangers spoke to her slowly, like she was a child, or avoided her entirely. The way her landlords dismissed her requests for accessibility fixes. The constant calculations she had to make just to live independently. Each story stirred something protective in Jake. He wanted to fix everything for her, the way he had fixed her chair. But he also knew she wasn't fragile. She was strong in ways most people couldn't see. All she needed was someone to stand beside her, not carry her. And Jake found himself wanting to be that someone. One Saturday, Jake suggested they take a drive. "Been cooped up in that apartment too long," he said. Emily hesitated, then agreed. He loaded her chair into the back of his truck with practiced ease and helped her into the passenger seat. They drove out of town, past rolling fields and small farms, until they reached a quiet lake. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun, and the air smelled of grass and pine. Jake carried her chair to the edge of the dock, and together they sat, watching the water ripple. Emily closed her eyes, breathing deeply. "I haven't been out like this in years," she admitted. Jake glanced at her, his chest tightening with unspoken feelings. That afternoon by the lake became the start of a tradition. Whenever the weight of their lives grew heavy, they would escape together, sometimes to the lake, sometimes to a diner in town, sometimes just cruising aimlessly down back roads. With each trip, their bond deepened. They didn't label it, didn't rush it, but the comfort between them grew undeniable. Emily teased Jake about his stubborn work habits. Jake admired her quiet strength, and though neither said it outright, both felt the stirrings of something more than friendship. One evening, as Jake dropped her off, Emily placed her hand on his arm before he could step away. Her eyes held his, steady and searching. "You know, I don't let many people in," she whispered. "But you're different." Jake's heart pounded, his throat suddenly dry. He wanted to tell her everything, that she reminded him of his sister, that she made him feel alive again, that he cared for her more than he should. But instead, he simply covered her hand with his own and said, "I'm not going anywhere."